Hey guys, so the first thing I'm going to do to get us started is preheat my oven. It's going to need preheated up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm also going to have a pot of water here. I would estimate probably a medium to a large pot, filled about halfway with water that we're going to use for our mashed potatoes. The next thing I'm going to do is wash all of my produce. And the next thing I'm going to do is medium dice my potatoes, and then I'm going to cut up my carrots kind of like French fries. And the goal with these is that we are okay if they're a different shape because they're turning into mashed potatoes. We do want them to be generally about the same size, just so it takes the same amount of time to cook all the pieces. So our potatoes are diced. We'll add those into the pot of boiling water once it boils. From now, I am going to do my carrots, but I'm going to grab a bowl to put those potatoes in just so they're out of my way on the cutting board. Alright, so all of my potatoes are going to go in here. Now, peeling your carrots is kind of optional, but it just really depends on what you particularly like. So in my case, I'm going to peel them Throw my scraps in that little bowl that I brought out. I'm gonna peel them all before I start cutting them. Kind of one thing at a time, you know? Hear my water coming up to a boil slowly. All right. Now I want these to be about French fry length. So I'm going to cut this in about half and then cut them half this way. And that's perfect. This side, just so they cook a bit quickly, I'm going to cut that top chunkier portion into quarters. So again, doing the chunkier part in quarters. And this one just needs to go in half. These are going to basically turn into like carrot French fries. We'll roast them in the oven with the meatloaf. And our oven is preheated. Our water's coming to a boil, so next the potatoes are going to go in. All right, folks, so my water came to a boil, so now I am going to be able to add in my potatoes into my water. Keep in mind, we're pouring something into very hot liquid, so we want to make sure that we are practicing that safety skill of pouring away from us. Do it very carefully, gradually, so you make sure not to splash yourself with that boiling water. There we go. Those are going to boil for about 16 to 18 minutes, which is why we start them before we do anything else. So the next thing I'm going to do is mix up my sauce. I have some brown sugar, some chili paste, and some ketchup. And this is going to be the sauce that goes on top of my meatloaf. I'm just going to mix that all up. All right, and I'll bring that in closer so you can get a look there for sauce. So the next step we're going to do is actually making our meatloaf. So you can see I have about 10 ounces of ground beef in here. And then I'm going to add in my breadcrumbs, my mirepoix. So a mirepoix is just carrots, celery, and onion. This is one that they already did that came with my mixture, but you could also make your own if you wanted to. And then my Weeknight Hero Spice Blend, which I'm going to share the recipe for you. All of these spice blends are delicious and actually really easy for you to make at home. I just happen to have that in stock. They're usually a mixture of paprika, onion powder, garlic powder, just in different ratios. And then I'm going to crack one egg in there. And now I'm going to mix that all up with my hands. If you don't like touching raw meat with your hands, you can do something else too. You can grab a spoon, but I just like to get in there with my hands. It's a bit easier. So I just want to make sure everything is really incorporated. especially that egg, because it's going to help everything stick together. And I'm not doing this meatloaf in an actual like bread pan. It's just gonna get formed and put on a sheet pan. So I need to make sure it really sticks together. All right, let me show you what it looks like now. There we go. All right, next I'm gonna set up my meatloaf. So pro cleaning tip is if you don't wanna have to scrub this pan very much, at the end you can just line it with some foil. Go. Then I'm going to take my meatloaf mixture here, and you want to keep it to one side of the pan because eventually you're going to roast your carrots on the other side of it. So I'm going to bring this kind of in a ball here, place it on my pan, and then I want to shape it into a loaf. Just make sure it looks tightly packed. Perfect. Next I'm going to add the glaze on, but I need to wash my hands. And I'm not going to use all of the glaze. I actually separated it, as you can see there, into two separate quantities. I'm going to do about half of the mixture right on it while it cooks, and then I'm going to leave the other half for serving if we want to have any extra. I'm just going to drizzle this over here. The reason why I separated them in the first place was just to make sure there's no cross-contamination between the raw meat, this spoon that's touching the raw meat, right, and the one that I want to serve later with the meal. All right. So that's on top there. This is going to slide into the oven for about 10 minutes. All right, my next step is going to be to drain my potatoes from the hot water. As you can see in my sink, I have a strainer. Because this is still really hot, we need to make sure that we are pouring away from us. Make sure your hands, arms, face, everything is free, away from all of that steam and hot water that's coming out of your way. All right. That pan can go back on a non-hot or cool burner on your stove to cool down before washing. Then I'm going to transfer these over into that bowl there so that we can make our mashed potatoes. There we go. My recipe says about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Instead, I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of butter because it's what I prefer. I'm also going to add a splash of whole milk just to make it a little on the creamier side. And then I will use my mashing tool to mash these into the consistency that I desire. If you like super whipped potatoes, you could also grab out your mixer, like a hand mixer, whip those together. But I'm just going to use my my hand masher. Just a splash of milk there. You can use whatever kind of milk you have on hand. I just have whole milk. And my masher. You can also do this right in your pot if you have a stainless steel pot. Unfortunately, mine is only non-stick. And when you use this in a non-stick pan, you have the risk of chipping that non-stick coating on it. And it's not healthy. Looks great. Our meatloaf still has about 3 minutes before we add the carrots onto the plate. So let's make sure we have these carrots ready to go. All right, to prepare my carrots, I'm just going to drizzle them with a little bit of olive oil. And then season them with some salt and pepper, which I did also add to the mashed potatoes. I just didn't show that on video. Salt, a little pepper. These are going to eventually be served with like a tzatziki sauce, so they don't need to be super seasoned. With anything else. All right, so those are nicely covered with our olive oil. And now I'm going to transfer these onto the other side of the sheet pan with the steak, or with the meatloaf. Just make sure that you try to add them in a single layer onto that pan. So 1 second as I get that ready for it to show. All right, so now I'm going to take my carrots and put them on my sheet here. Again, we're aiming to put them in a single layer, keeping in mind that this pan is hot. Yep, there we go. Now this is going to go back in for about 10 to 12 minutes. All right, so the meatloaf has cooked for about 20 to 22 minutes. I am going to test the internal temperature with my meat thermometer. According to the FDA, restaurants and home cooks should cook their ground beef to 155 degrees Fahrenheit, but according to the CDC, it's 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So as long as you're somewhere around the 155, 160, you should be safe. So I'm gonna put this in the center most part, and it is not ready, so it's only at 117 degrees. So we got to put this back in the oven probably for another 3 to 4 minutes. We'll test it again in a couple minutes. All right, so after a few more minutes, we're going to check the internal temperature there, and it's reading 158. So that's perfect, right in the middle of that recommendation. So our meatloaf is done. I'm gonna let it rest on the cutting board. I'm gonna scoop it up, let it rest on the cutting board for about a couple minutes, and then I'll slice it up, and I'm gonna add it into my meal prep containers. And then my meal will be complete.